document production. I mentioned that we're going to go through the different types of productions here that you're able to create within NextPoint. I think we're all pretty familiar with endorsing and numbering document sets. We'll talk about you're going to be able to assemble privilege logs. So you can take the documents that have been marked privileged in your database, why you're not going to be producing them, and assemble a privilege log saying these are the documents that we are not producing, and here are the reasons that we are not producing them, all within your privilege log. Quality assurance, I just have this on here to mention that there are a number of QA or QC, whatever you want to use, processes built into the app to make sure that you are producing exactly what you want to produce, and helping you make sure that you're not producing privileged information or that you have coded things consistently. We'll also go through some of those best practices as we go through these courses together to make sure that you have a standardized process to make sure that everyone is on the same page as to how you would go about creating a production. And then obviously you want to make sure throughout the entire process that you are securing your information throughout, especially you don't want to go through and be secure about it from start to almost finish and then exchange unsecurely. So making sure that you can exchange with opposing counsel securely and safely. Some production vocabulary. I feel like most of these we've kind of either touched on a little bit or are familiar with already. So stamping and endorsing kind of goes along with Bates numbering, but stamping and endorsing is a unique number attached to each page of a document in an electronic or manual format to identify it. This goes along with Bates numbering. It's often called Bates stamping. And this comes from the Bates Company, which was one of the originators of the numeric stamping machines. And this has been going on for a long time, whether it was on a manual process where you're actually stamping those documents physically on the pages, or now in Ediscovery being able to stamp those documents virtually and re-imaging them. If you're ever at trivia and you need to know, for whatever reason, maybe you go to legal trivia and they ask who was the inventor of the Bates numbering system, it's Edwin G. Bates. That the only reason I know that is from having worked here. And so if that ever gets asked at trivia night and I need to answer that, I am glad that I will be team MVP, at least for a question. Native files, we've spoken a little bit about this. This is a file that is maintained in the format in which it was created, just kind of that original file. It's like collecting that original email as opposed to collecting a forwarded email. A load file is used to import data into an Ediscovery system. It defines parameters for image documents and often contains metadata. The way I like to describe a load file is like a map for those documents, telling you what you need to know about them for those metadata fields. And we'll get into that more in our next session on collections and imports. For those who are not as familiar with load files, I know I wasn't when I first started out, but they can seem a little bit daunting, but are quite easy once you know what you're looking at. Privilege log. We talked about a list of set of documents that a party did not produce on account of privilege. Spoliation, the destruction or alteration of data that might be relevant to a legal matter. So obviously, I mean, spoliation is one of those words. I'm sure there's a word for words that sound like their meaning, but like spoliation just doesn't sound good. And it's not something that you're supposed to be doing, obviously. You should not be destroying or altering data for the purposes of trying to conceal things from the court. The judges can offer or hand down punishments for or ramifications for spoliation, depending on the severity of it and the impact on the case. So something that we definitely want to avoid. And then the production types here. We've got 3 different production types You can create multiple different production types within an Xpoint. These are 3 of the most common types. You can all obviously create your own custom types depending on the export template that you customize. But production export is just going to be all documents are produced in TIFF and or JPEG files. They're going to be generally imaged with Bates numbers on them. And the related metadata is included in the load file that you produce. This is a very standard production type that you're going to see, that you are going to use, and generally goes along and follows that ESI protocol that you have in place for what you should be producing and when. PDF export is pretty well aptly named. All documents are going to be individual PDF files. Load file can contain Bates and metadata fields if you choose to do so. And then the natives export, I always jump to the bottom here. Use extreme caution when producing natively. And the reason for that is that, so all native documents are produced to the opposing counsel, so they are produced in their original format. And this can be troublesome if you had conducted any sort of redactions or anything of that nature, because if you do a natives export, it's not going to include those redactions, and they're going to be able to see whatever was underneath there. So I always like to point out that you should use extreme caution when using a natives export. And there are best practices for it, which we'll go over in production exports and exchanges. So I think this is the last slide, final thoughts. The goal is just to remain reasonable, methodical, and thoughtful in all aspects of this. Just making sure that you are thinking through your process. You have that standardized process as you go through Ediscovery.